I woke up at 2:47 a.m. because something in my body knew I was not alone in my house, even before my mind caught up to that terrible realization. The kitchen light was on, and I could see the glow spilling into the hallway from where I lay frozen in my bed under covers that suddenly felt like a shroud. I had turned off every light before going to sleep, because I always did, because I was meticulous about electricity bills and nighttime routines and all, the small habits that make a person feel in control of their environment. So the light being on meant someone else had turned it on. I told myself it was nothing as I reached for the baseball bat I kept beside my knitstand for situations exactly like this one. I told myself the bulb had malfunctioned, or I had forgotten, or any explanation that did not involve a stranger in my home in the dead of night. I crept down the hallway with my heart pounding so loudly I was certain whoever was in my kitchen could hear it, announcing my approach with every terrified beat. The man was standing perfectly still in the center of my kitchen, facing away from me, with his arms hanging loose at his sides like a puppet without strings. He was tall and thin and wearing clothes that looked like they had been pulled from a grave, soil-stained and ragged and decades out of fashion, in ways I could not immediately identify. His hair was matted and tangled, and hung past his shoulders in clumps that seemed to move slightly, even though there was no breeze inside my sealed and silent house. I screamed, and the sound that came out of my throat was primal and raw and carried all the terror that my body had been containing since the moment I first saw that impossible light. The man did not react to my scream at all, did not turn around, did not flinch or startle or give any indication that he had heard a sound that should have made anyone jump. He just stood there facing my kitchen window like he was looking at something outside in the darkness that I could not see from my position in the doorway. I ran back to my bedroom and locked the door and called 911 with hands that shook so badly I could barely press the numbers on my phone screen accurately. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was, and that officers were being sent immediately, and I should not engage with the intruder under any circumstances whatsoever. I pressed my ear against the door and listened for sounds of movement, but the house was silent in a way that felt wrong, too silent, like the air itself was holding its breath. The police arrived in 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours when I heard them enter through the front door I had left unlocked in my panic to reach safety. They called out announcements of their presence, and I heard their footsteps moving through my home room by room until they reached the kitchen where the man had been standing. Their voices went quiet for a moment, and then one of them called for me to come out, said the house was clear, said there was no one here. I walked to the kitchen, expecting to find it empty, but what I found instead made me understand that empty and safe are not always the same thing at all. The man was gone, but his footprints remained, muddy impressions on my clean tile floor that started in the exact center where he had been standing and led to the back door. The back door was standing open, even though I knew with absolute certainty that I had locked it before going to bed, because I always checked, twice every single night. The officers followed the footprints outside with their flashlights cutting beams through the darkness of my backyard that bordered the state forest behind my property line. The prints continued across my lawn, through my garden, over my fence, and into the trees where the officers stopped and stared into darkness that their flashlights could not adequately penetrate. One of them said they would need to wait for daylight to conduct a proper search, and the other one nodded in agreement without looking away from the tree line. I did not sleep for the rest of that night, and when dawn finally arrived, the police returned with more officers and a K-9 unit to track wherever my intruder had gone. They followed the trail into the forest, and I watched from my back porch as they disappeared between the trees in pursuit of explanations that I desperately needed, but was not certain I wanted. The wait stretched on for hours that felt like days, until finally a single officer emerged from the tree line with an expression that made my stomach drop into my feet. He said the footprints led to a spot approximately 2 miles into the forest where something had been buried for a very long time and recently disturbed from below. He said the grave had been opened from the inside based on the pattern of displaced dirt and the position of roots that had been pushed outward rather than pulled inward. He said there was a headstone nearby that was so weathered they could barely read the name, but the date of death was clearly visible, and it was from 1847. I asked what the name on the headstone said, and the officer consulted his notes with a reluctance that suggested he did not want to tell me what he had found there. The name was Ezra Whitmore, and according to county records, he had been a farmer who lived in a house that once stood on the exact spot where my home was now built. He had died under circumstances that were never clearly documented, but local legends suggested something dark and terrible that the official histories chose not to preserve for future generations. I researched Ezra Whitmore obsessively over the following days, digging through archives and historical societies and the memories of elderly residents who still remembered stories their grandparents had told them. The picture that emerged was one of a man who had made deals with things that lived in the forest, things that had been worshipped by people who inhabited this land long before settlers arrived. He had offered them something precious in exchange for something forbidden, and the terms of that exchange had apparently never been fully satisfied despite his death and burial. The standing began 3 nights after the police found his disturbed grave, and it has not stopped since, no matter what I have tried to make it end. I wake up every night at exactly 2:47 a.m., and the kitchen light is always on, and Ezra Whitmore is always standing in the center of my floor facing the window. He never moves while I am watching, but the footprints in the morning always show that he has walked somewhere during the night, has gone to places in my house that I did not see him visit. The footprints appeared in my bedroom last week, circling my bed in patterns that suggested he had stood over me while I slept before I woke up at my designated hour. The prints were so close to my mattress that he must have been leaning over me, must have been looking at my face from inches away while I lay unconscious. I have started sleeping with lights on, but it does not matter because darkness finds a way in, and Ezra always comes when the darkness calls him. I installed cameras throughout my house, hoping to capture footage of what happens during the hours I cannot account for between falling asleep and waking at 2:47 a.m. The recordings show nothing but static during the times when Ezra should be visible, white noise and distortion that covers exactly the moments when something impossible is happening. The audio captures sounds, though, breathing that is too slow and too wet, and footsteps that drag across floors in patterns that match the prints I find every morning. I tried to leave my house and stay somewhere else, but Ezra followed me to the hotel room 40 miles away and stood in that kitchen too at exactly 2:47 a.m. I tried staying with friends, but he appeared in their homes, and they asked me never to contact them again after they saw what I had brought into their safe spaces. I tried staying awake all night, but sleep eventually takes everyone, and when I finally collapsed from exhaustion, He was there when I opened my eyes, standing closer than he had ever stood before. The forest behind my house has changed since the grave was discovered, and the trees seem to lean toward my property, now in ways that defy the direction of wind and light. Animals no longer make sounds in those woods after dark, and even during the day the birds are silent when they fly over the canopy that has grown thicker with shadows. The neighbors have started to notice the changes too, but they do not come to check on me anymore because they can feel something wrong, radiating from my address like heat from a fire. I went into the forest myself last month to find the grave they had discovered and to see if there was anything there that might help me understand what was happening. Bang! The walk took longer than it should have based on the distance the police had reported, and the trees seemed to shift around me as I moved between them. When I finally found the grave, it was exactly as they had described, a hole in the ground that had been pushed open from inside, and the headstone with Ezra Whitmore's name carved into stone that should have eroded completely by now but somehow remained legible. There was something written on the back of the headstone that the police had not mentioned in their reports, and I do not know if they saw it or if it appeared after they left. The words were carved in letters that were newer than the rest, deeper and sharper, and made by hands that had been dead for almost 200 years. The message said, "I will stand in your home until the debt is paid," and underneath that was carved a name that made me fall to my knees in the dirt. It was my name, my full name, spelled correctly with my middle name included, a name that no historical record from 1847 could possibly have contained. I understand now that the debt Ezra Whitmore owed to the things in the forest was not paid with his death because death was never the currency they accepted for payment. The debt was transferred to whoever lived on the land where he had made his original bargain, passed down through generations of owners who had all experienced strange occurrences that drove them away eventually. I found records of every person who had owned my property since Ezra died, and every single one had either moved within a year or died under circumstances that were never satisfactorily explained by authorities. The standing has changed over the past week, and Ezra no longer waits for me to fall asleep before he comes to visit my house now. I see him during the day now, glimpses in mirrors and windows, and the corner of my eye that vanish when I turn to look directly at them. I hear his footsteps in rooms where no one is walking, and I smell the grave dirt that clings to his clothes even when the air should be fresh and clean. He spoke to me last night for the first time since this nightmare began, and his voice was like leaves rustling in wind that came from underground rather than above. He said the debt was almost paid, and that I had been chosen to settle accounts that had been accumulating interest for nearly 2 centuries of waiting. He said I would understand soon what the things in the forest wanted, and why Ezra had agreed to give it to them, and why I would agree too when the time came. I am writing this because I need someone to know what happened here, in case I become unable to tell the story myself after whatever comes next finally arrives. The footprints this morning led from the kitchen to my bedroom, and then to a spot in front of my desk where I am sitting right now, writing these words. The prints stop here at my chair and do not continue anywhere else, which means Ezra came to this exact spot last night and stood behind me and waited. I can feel something standing behind me right now as I type these final paragraphs, and I will not turn around because I know what I will see if I do, and I am not ready for that yet. The breathing on the back of my neck is cold and wet and carries the smell of soil that has been sealed away from air and light for almost 2 centuries. The presence is patient because it has waited this long already, and a few more minutes will not matter to something that experiences time differently than living people do. The things in the forest are calling now, and I can hear them even though my windows are closed, and my house should be insulated from sounds that come from outside. The call is not made of words, but I understand what it means because understanding has been growing inside me like a seed planted without my knowledge or consent. The debt requires specific payment, and the payment requires someone willing to walk into the forest and never come back, and I think that someone is going to be me. I am going to stand up from this desk now, and I am going to turn around, and I am going to look at Ezra Whitmore's face for the first time since this began. I am going to follow him out the back door, and across my lawn, and over the fence, and into the trees, where the things that made the original bargain are waiting to receive what they were promised so long ago. I am going to pay the debt, because the alternative is to spend eternity with a dead man standing in my kitchen at 2:47 a.m. every single night. If anyone finds this account, please do not buy this house, and please do not live on this land, and please do not make any bargains with the things that whisper from the forest after dark. The debt is never fully paid, and the terms are never what you expect, and the standing never stops until you give them exactly what they want. I can see his face now in the reflection of my computer screen, and he is smiling for the first time, and his smile is full of teeth that are too long and too sharp and too eager for what comes next. I am standing up now. I am turning around now. I am looking at something that was once a man named Ezra Whitmore, but has become something else entirely in the years since his death. He is reaching out his hand toward me, and I am taking it because I have no choice left, and because some debts can only be paid in person by walking into the darkness and never looking back. The forest is calling. The debt is due, and I am finally ready to learn what the things in the trees want from those of us who are foolish enough to live on land that was promised to them before we were ever born. My footprints will lead from this desk to the back door, to the lawn, to the fence, to the trees, where they will end at a grave that was opened from inside. Whoever finds this, please do not follow those prints, and please do not come looking for me, and please do not try to understand what happened here, because understanding is the first step toward making the same mistakes that Ezra made, and that I am about to make right now in the darkness. The kitchen light is flickering. Ezra is waiting. And the forest is so very hungry after all these years of patient expectation. I am going now. Do not follow me. Do not look for me. And whatever you do, do not answer when the things in the trees start calling your name, too.